If you're watching this video right now, you or someone you know has recently lost a loved one. Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. I'm going to be dividing this topic into two parts. Part 1, which is this video, will focus on dispelling some myths about grief. Part 2, which is the next video, will focus on types of grief, stages of grief, and how you can deal with grief. Grief is our automatic response to loss. It is the suffering one feels when a loved one passes away. But grief is not a unitary entity. In fact, grief is a set of reactions that are usually transient. They include physical reactions such as insomnia, lethargy, headaches, unexplained pains and aches in the body, cognitive reactions such as indecisiveness or thoughts of self-harm or suicide, emotional reactions, which will be discussed in the stages of grief section, behavioral reactions such as avoiding social contact or finding new hobbies to distract oneself, and spiritual reactions, essentially trying to answer the why questions, trying to find the reason for loss. One of life's greatest challenges is coping with the death of someone you love. Remember that the experience of grief is highly individual, and there's no absolute right or wrong way to grieve. Your grief experience is dependent on multiple factors and includes your personality type, your learned coping mechanisms, your life experiences, your faith and religiosity, and how important the lost person was to you. Because there are many misconceptions about grief, let's bust some myths surrounding it. Myth number 1, the more you ignore, the faster the pain will go. Just like physical trauma, emotional trauma does not go away by ignoring it. For instance, if a person is running a high fever, we would expect that person to face the situation and get help from a doctor. We wouldn't expect him or her to ignore the fever and wait for it to go away. If you try to ignore the pain and prevent it from surfacing, it could come back later with a vengeance, a phenomenon called delayed grief. It's better to face your grief right now and actively engage with it rather than trying to suppress it. Myth number 2, be strong after a loss and don't let emotions weaken you. Well, if you're feeling sad, anxious, afraid, or lonely, this is a normal reaction to loss. Crying never means you're weak. Feel and express your true feelings so that others may help you. There is no shame in being vulnerable during this difficult time. Myth number 3, not crying means you don't feel sorry for your loss. While crying is a normal and expected response to sadness, it isn't the only one. Crying is not essential to the grieving process. Some cultures train people from a young age that crying is embarrassing and best avoided. Men are especially taught to not cry and lend support to others. Some people also naturally condition themselves from childhood to express their emotions without tears. Just because someone isn't crying doesn't mean he or she is not grieving. He or she may be grieving in a way that is different from others, and that's okay too. Myth number 4, men grieve lesser than women. As I explained just now, people from different cultures and socioeconomic backgrounds grieve differently. Men may, in some cases in fact, actually grieve more than women. Having said that, men and women are differently wired and therefore often express grief and feel grief in ways that are different from each other. Myth number 5, the character and intensity of grief remains the same irrespective of the person you lose. Well, this is the same as saying all potato chips bought from the market taste the same. The grief experienced from the loss of a parent, a child, a sibling, or a spouse are all different. But this doesn't mean that grief for one person is more important than the grief experienced for another person. Each death is unique, and so is the grief experienced. Myth number 6, grieving doesn't last more than a year. Well, grief is not a Netflix subscription. Grief is complicated and can last anywhere from less than a month to more than a year. Putting a timeline on grief is highly insensitive and must be discouraged. You must have the right to process your grief at your own pace, irrespective of the time it takes, even if it is more than a year. Myth number 7, forget your loss to move on with life. Forgetting and accepting your loss are two completely different things. It is not only insensitive to forget about a person you've lost, it is also humanly impossible to do so. Accepting your loss, on the other hand, is the best thing you can do for yourself and the departed. You can move on with your life and cherish the memories of your time with the deceased. These memories make us stronger, keep us grounded, and can even teach us how to tackle life's toughest challenges. And lastly, myth number 8, once resolved, grief vanishes forever. Well, grief does not vanish, but it does change character with time. Grief tends to reduce in intensity over a period of time. However, you may still experience outbursts of grief throughout your life. Out of nowhere, a powerful surge of grief may grip you. This can be frightening and debilitating, but it is normal and natural. Sudden surges of grief are usually triggered by external stimuli, such as being in a place that was frequented by a lost loved one, or when he or she is being talked about by others. Okay, that's it for today. Stay tuned for part 2, where I will be discussing the types of grief, stages of grief, and how you can deal with grief. Thanks for watching and have a great day ahead.